Hello and welcome back to the History of Video Gaming podcast. My name is Ben and I am joined with Wes. How are you, Wes?
I'm doing great, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We got a great episode today. Tons of great games. I can't wait to get into it. But first, what have you been playing, Wes?
Well, I'm trying to think if I played anything new. No, so this is just the same thing as last week, pretty much, but getting more into Risk of Rain 2.
Oh, okay. How's it going?
And it's pretty good. It's one of those ones where, like, I'm never too sure about buying an early access game, especially when, like, at the surface, it doesn't seem like it has that much content yet.
Mm-hmm.
But even just with what they have, and there's, like, a couple achievements that are hard enough to get, but still seem like I could do them, so, like, it's keeping me involved. And each time you get an achievement, you unlock a new item, which can, like, affect all your runs in the future. So it's been really good, and it's definitely super fun to play with friends. I have a friend who I've been doing a lot of co-op with him in that.
Nice.
It's cool. There's a lot of, like, all the characters play super differently, so it's not like you're just different skins on the same person with slightly different moves.
Right.
And we're starting to figure out, like, oh, this item is good for everybody, but if you happen to be playing this character, it's, like, extra good for him and stuff like that.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of nice intricacies that keep it interesting and change the way you can play. So even though you're doing, like, the same thing every time, you can approach it from different ways.
Nice. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds like a
I've been
game
loving
that,
it a lot.
like, right up your alley, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, after I poured, like, 200 hours into Binding of Isaac, and
Yeah.
I think I could probably pour a lot of hours into this too. It's real fun.
Cool.
But what about you? What have you been playing recently?
Well, I have been playing a lot of RuneScape. So yeah, I've been playing a lot of RuneScape. Basically, not too much to report, really. I've been playing this mini game called Winter Todd, which a lot of people play because it's like the thing to do to get fire making experience. And I don't really care about that, but the thing is the boss that you're fighting does damage based on a percentage of your health. So if you're low health, it's actually beneficial to do the boss then, because you don't get hit for very hard and you can get, like, a lot of food that heals you up real easy. So
Interesting. Okay. So
Yeah.
like throughout the fight, his damage is already predetermined if you go in with low health.
yeah, it does like 10% of your health every time he hits you. So
Okay.
if you've got 10 health, it does 1 damage.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's just easier to do it at a lower level, because the food that you need in order to replenish your health is a lot cheaper and heals a lot more, like, by percentage, you know, compared to a higher level player. So for instance, I'm healing myself with jugs of wine, which has been pretty fun.
Just chugging. Yeah.
Yeah, and that heals like 11 health. So if you can imagine, I'm getting hit for like 3 or 4 damage at a time. I can get hit 3 times and then heal just with 1 jug. But if I get hit for 11 damage at a time, I have to use a jug every time I get hit.
Right.
So it makes sense to do it at an early level, which is why I'm trying to slog through it, because honestly, it's like a massive grind. You have to, basically, the goal is either 99 fire making, which is the highest you can go in that, or in my case, I really want the pet, which is like a rare drop. It's like 1 out of
Gotcha.
2,500 drop, which is a lot. I've probably done 100 runs so far. Each run is like about 5 minutes, so it's not too bad. But
That's not too bad. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm starting to get over it now.
Yeah.
I
What
got
fire
the
making
second
are you at?
rarest drop, which I'll take, even though I can't use it yet. It's like too high level, but
Okay.
I really want that pet, you know?
Yeah.
That's how they get you.
You're gonna be there until you get 99 fire making anyway.
Oh, well, the thing is, if I get 99 fire making and I don't get the pet, I'll be super salty.
Yeah. Because then you're doing it for no extra benefit.
Yeah. So it's all right. I've been enjoying it somewhat. The game isn't very difficult or that annoying, so it's going okay.
Yeah. It's an
And
okay grind.
Yeah, I also get a little bit of construction experience, which is cool because I can use that to build my player-made house, and I'm a big, like, player-made house kind of person, so
Yeah.
that's been fun. But it's kind of also like, oh, I kind of want to do all these cool quests, and it's like, oh, those quests are going to give me combat XP, which is going to make this game harder. So
Right.
kind of just
Yeah.
like,
And are you playing still in your Iron Man character?
yep. So I
Okay.
got to be super careful too that I'm not getting too low when I'm fighting the boss, which has happened a couple times. I got probably down to like 10 health a couple times.
Yikes.
I'm getting hit with like the highest they can hit is 20% of your health, which is like 6 damage for me. So I've never been one hit away from death, but I've been within 2, I'd say, a couple times.
Yeah, could be a little scary.
Yeah. As long as you're paying attention, you won't die. But sometimes that can be hard when you're doing it 100 times in a row or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's basically what I've been doing. It's kind of
Cool.
like a lame thing, I feel like. But,
I mean, it's whatever in your downtime. Different thing for everybody.
yeah. I mean, if I get the pet, it won't be a lame thing anymore. But the
There
pet
you
is
got
like
bragging
this,
rights.
I know, it's like this fire phoenix looking thing.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. It'll be pretty cool. But
I've been lucky that I never got drawn in by the cosmetics in free-to-play games, or at least buying them.
mhm.
But like, I definitely will brag about it if I get it. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty sick.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't pay for it, but I'm glad I got it.
The thing about this too is I think it's just one of those things where I feel like if I don't get it now, it's going to be even more of a pain to get it later, because I'll be higher
Right.
level, do more damage, etc. So I kind of feel like I'm forced to do the grind right now.
I mean, forced is a strong word, but I know what you mean.
No, they have a gun to my head, Wes.
Right,
Can-
right.
So yeah.
You need this pet to be cool.
Yeah. So that's what I've been doing. I think I'm getting kind of tired of it. So probably next week I won't be doing it so much. But
Yeah.
right
Go
now,
back to some Crusader Kings or something.
yeah, right now that's all I'm doing. And what's worse is I only have a month of membership before I have to decide to pay again. So I'm trying to do it all like right now.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I've been up to.
Nice.
Yeah, why don't we get into it today? Because we've got a pretty packed episode with some great games this week, which is great because last week was the lame duck episode, which was a
Right.
pain, but this one's a little bit better. So to start off today, I wanted to talk to you about the history of Nutting Associates because there you've got some pretty big events happening in their history right around this time. And they've also been sort of a big player that we've talked about for a while. So just as a quick recap, Nutting Associates was founded by Bill Nutting, who's the owner of the company, and they kind of manufactured arcade cabinets for a while. Eventually, Bushnell and Dabney, who are the Atari co-founders, joined Nutting Associates and helped build Computer Space, which was a massive success and one of the
Right.
first big video arcade machine games of all time. So that went really well for them. At the end of that project, though, Bushnell really wanted part ownership of Nutting Associates. He's like, I'm starting this new sort of side to this company. I feel like, I deserve a part ownership. So he asked for, I think, a third of the company in terms of ownership, and Bill Nutting declined that. And as a result, Bushnell left and Dabney went with him. And they founded Atari. So after they founded Atari, they went back to Nutting Associates after they had come up with Pong, and they're like, hey, do you want to license Pong from us? It's going to be this great game, and we think it'll make you a lot of money. And again, Bill Nutting was like, no, I don't need that. So already we've got like the father of the video games industry like slips through the hands of this guy, and then think of how much money they could have made if they had licensed Pong. Like,
Right. If they've been building the cabinets for it.
yeah, so much money they just like gave up, and instead they decided we'll just make our own version of Pong. We'll just steal their idea and call it Computer Spaceball. What are they going to do?
Right.
We've got the technology or whatever. So they did that, and obviously Computer Spaceball, while it was an early clone, didn't do that well. So after Computer Spaceball comes out, Nutting Associates continues to produce a bunch of different Pong clones throughout 1973 and 74. They experiment with innovations on controls. They use sliders for some of their Pong clones rather than the traditional dials or joysticks.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And they also have the first true color video game that's mass sold, which is Wimbledon. But both these innovations don't really result in any sales really. Because when you think about it, okay, we've got this color video game it's so innovative, but it's just Pong with color. It's like they had this great innovation idea, but they didn't really use it to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
So same thing with the controls. It's like we've got these slider controls. What are we going to do with them? Pong.
Pong.
It's like, I don't know if that's going to sell well. There's like 1,000 Pong clones coming out. So skip forward to 1974. The company goes bankrupt.
Right.
So obviously that puts a hold on a bunch of projects they're doing. Stuff like the Watergate game, I think probably got put on hold at this point. It's still unsure if they ever released that game, but I think there's definitely some evidence of games that were being made just getting put on hold.
Right.
But the company does become solvent again in mid 75, meaning that they leave bankruptcy and start developing again. So they start developing. It takes a couple months for development. The games that they're begin developing are all sequels. So it's like Table Tennis 2, Computer Space 2-player, like a bunch of like games that aren't gonna do anything.
Right.
Some of them I think get released. Most of them don't ever get released. And that's because in 77, Bill Nutting sells the company to a slot machine manufacturer. And then in 79, the slot machine manufacturer merges Nutting Associates with some supply company and they get dissolved, basically. So, yeah, their last game, which I think is pretty interesting, was a game called Ricochet, which I think came out in 77, right before it was sold to the slot machine manufacturer. And that was a clone of TV Pinball, which is an honorable mention in today's episode. So basically, their last game was a clone of a 3-year-old game.
Right.
And like, I'm sure the technology in 1977, people are not expecting that. So, yeah, I feel like it's a really sad story because basically they made a couple interesting clones of Pong, but never really did their own thing. Then they get bankrupt, they start up again, get sold, start up again, get merged, and it's over.
Yeah. It's like a lot of things just in a row not really going right for them. They kind of they had all the creative stuff on the hardware side of it, of like messing with the control schemes and saying like, hey, does this work better than joysticks or dials? And then getting color graphics in one of their games too, but without like the creative game design that they kind of had with Bushnell before he left. They were just like putting all this cool technological innovation into stuff that no one wanted to play. So
I know. I think it really highlights something that we've talked about before in the podcast, which is like Atari, they didn't just know how to like make video games on the hardware side. It was really more, we know how to make great games, period. And they did so many different innovations on the gameplay side and made so many different types of games. And Nutting Associates, they just never did that. They were always just, what's the hot game out? We're going to clone it. And we might put our own spin on it, but I don't think they ever really did anything that was unique to them other than the Watergate stuff, which we don't even know if it actually went out. So,
right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. They kind of had all these ideas, but wasn't anything that the people were really looking for. And then Atari just kept coming out with all this new stuff.
Yeah.
And they even at some points didn't have the same like cool hardware that Nutting Associates might have had, but because their gameplay was better, they're the ones who did better.
Yeah. Because I definitely feel like Atari kind of, when they look at a new game, they're like, this is a game idea we have. What technology do we need in order to make it happen? Whereas Nutting Associates, they're more like, we've got this cool technology. What are we going to do with it? And nobody had the answer. They're like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like now it can, and maybe back then too, it can work either way, and you can get a good game by saying like, hey, we have this cool tech concept, let's make a game out of it. But if no one's connecting those dots.
Yeah. And I think, in 1974, so basically right now where we are in the timeline, they go bankrupt and they never really recover from that, it seems. So
right.
We're basically going to stop seeing Nutting Associates in our timeline. I mean, we're going to see them every now and then through the end of 77, I want to say. But it's not going to be anything important or that relevant. So
right.
It's kind of sad because I feel like, they were one of the most important important positions in the early history of video gaming, when they made computer space. And then
Right, yeah, and making arcade cabinets, which kind of hadn't really been. I guess they'd made it for some of the physical ones, but not for like a arcade video game.
exactly. So yeah, it's kind of a sad thing, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're going to be seeing that a lot, because I mean, a lot of these names that we've been reading now, we know them because we've been doing the podcast for a while, but we don't hear them around today. So
Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, I'm sure it'll keep happening. But yeah, that's sort of the history of Nutting Associates in a nutshell.
Ooh, oh, that was good. In a nutting shell, you could
You
say.
like that?
Someone had to make the joke.
I think with that, let's go right into the timeline because we've got a lot to talk about this episode.
Yeah, let's get into it. All right, everybody, welcome back, and let's get straight into the timeline because we have a lot of good stuff to cover today, even a lot of good honorable mentions, that stuff we wish we could have played, but we couldn't actually get to. So, Ben, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so our first game here, first honorable mention is Air Race, which came out sometime in 1974, and this was by the developers of Space Sim, which was probably the first game that had an FPS component to it that I played earlier and was basically unplayable. But anyway, this is a 3D flight sim similar to Space Sim, but I think it's not in space. I really wanted to play this, but it appears to have been lost. There is a sequel to it that we will play in next episode, so watch out for that. We'll talk about it more then. But yeah, the developers of Space Sim still doing stuff. That's pretty cool.
And hopefully more playable this time.
Well, yeah, we'll find out. After that, we've got Coupe Frank. Is that how you would say that, Wes?
Yeah, either that or maybe like Coup Franc. I have no idea.
That sounds more French the way you did it.
I mean, I just put a lot of nasal in it and figured it sounded right, but
yeah. But this is by Atari Europe, so their European division, released in France. It's just a port of World Cup football. Which, when did that come out? That came out last episode, I think.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, so it's just another type of Pong clone, and this one used a color overlay, which is a little different, but it's basically just another Pong release. So,
one of many.
Yeah, one of many. Two games that are just okay, but Wes, why don't you talk about our next game, which is actually pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, and this one has Pong in the name and is made by Atari, but isn't necessarily a Pong clone. And so the first one I covered is Ping Pong, which I'm going to have trouble saying every single time because it's not ping pong or ping pong, but pin pong.
Yeah, like a pin that you use to sew with, pin pong.
Yes, yeah, thank you, because I don't know if I made it very clear the way I was just saying it. And this one was released sometime in the fall of '74 by Atari, and it was Atari's video game version of pinball. The cabinet looked really cool. I saw a video of somebody playing it, and it had like these swirly, colorful, very like mid-'70s designs to it. And I think I saw one of the flyers for it. It was like people with like afros dancing in bell-bottom jeans and silhouette.
Oh yeah.
So it was right in the time. They knew their market. And one cool thing about the cabinet is that it had these lights on the top of it that weren't part of the screen that I think were green, red, and orange, or 3 different colors. And they would light up depending on how many points you scored for the whatever you just hit on the pinball screen.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it seems like an extra element. I don't know if at the time it would have been overwhelming with everything going on, but at least something to kind of make it different, make it so it's not just the screen that you're playing on. but the screen itself was actually a very simple design. The only thing that was over the screen, and I'm not sure if it was like a plastic overlay or if it was painted on the screen, was two little just kind of triangles to show where your paddles or flippers were. There was also a line on the screen that did that, but just to give you an idea where like the bottom of the pinball screen was. But other than that, it was all black and white. Everything was just kind of squares and lines on the screen, but it did a pretty good job of representing what a digital version of pinball would look like. So to play the game, it was basically just regular pinball. You have three balls, but they're squares because it's still using the sort of Pong technology they had used before. And you hit them up with your flippers to score points. There are four bumpers on the screen that when the ball hits it, they bounce off. There's a spinner in the middle, which is basically just a big grid or a big plus sign. It doesn't move when you hit the ball there, but it will shoot the ball out in a random direction if you get it in there. And then on the side, there's four vertical lines on each side that you can hit that disappear when you hit them. And I'm assuming that they show back up and are worth more points once you clear all of them, like an actual pinball. But I don't know a ton about pinball, so I'm not sure how the scoring worked for that.
Sounds right.
Yeah, something like that. There's points, everything's bouncing. I'm not very good at it. That's about all I know about pinball. And the one weird thing with the graphical display that I think might have been disorienting for people playing it at the time, because I know it was for me, is that the line that represents the flipper isn't exactly where the flipper is when you try to hit the ball.
So like the collision's off or something?
Yeah. I don't know if I think it's a bit larger, and if you like hit the flipper button and it's just kind of like near your paddle but not actually touching the line, it'll work.
Okay.
And so when I was first playing it, I was just timing it like, okay, when the ball hits the line, I got to hit the flipper.
Right.
But then I would miss a lot of time because it was already like past the flipper by the time I hit the button, or it was a little confusing. But
so maybe some like technical limitations of the time, like not being able to do a bigger flipper or something.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was how much they were able to display on the screen, or if they wanted it to be that thin line, but they also wanted to have the player have more margin to be able to hit it. So I'm not sure if it was a choice or a limitation of the design, but either way, it was a little bit weird and kind of threw me off. And the only other thing about the gameplay is that there were high-pitched tones that played whenever you hit something on the board, and there were kind of different pitches based on what you hit or how many times you hit it.
All right, cool.
So going through it was pretty neat and simple, but I think it's really the first digital version of pinball that we've seen too.
Yeah, which kind of surprised me because I feel like we've covered quite a few games, and you would think pinball would be one of the first ones. But
yeah, I guess they thought of Pong as sort of their translation to something pinball-esque, but well, not really, because it has the dials and the joysticks. Yeah, you think somebody would have thought of hey, what if we just did a digital version of this?
Right.
But who knows? I don't know if it ended up being super popular anyway, so maybe people preferred the actual manual motion and all the lights and stuff that are on an actual pinball machine.
And that makes sense to me too.
Yeah. Although we do still see, I remember playing, I think it was 3D pinball that came with Windows.
Yeah.
And some of the Sonic pinball games. So like there were still some around for a while, but definitely I think the physical, like mechanical format is the more popular.
Right.
For my ratings for this game, for graphics, I gave it a 2 out of 10. It's pretty simple graphics, just a bunch of lines and squares, but even with all that simplicity, it still did a really good job of evoking what the pinball board, I guess, or pinball machine would actually look like. And with the technology that they had at the time, I thought it was pretty impressive of how they portrayed that. And also it was nice that it wasn't too much extra, because you could tell what was going on instead of having like a bunch of designs in the background, which the way that it was displayed probably would have just cluttered the screen up. And for sound, I gave it a 2 out of 10. I didn't get to play a version of this that actually had the sound, but I got to watch a video of someone playing on the original cabinet. And I gave it a 2 because there's a variety of sounds, which is good, but also because all of the sounds are like incredibly annoying. And they're super high-pitched buzzes.
Yeah. Oh no, we definitely have to get a listen to a version of that.
Yeah, here, let's see if we can play some of those right now. And it's also because it's trying to emulate a pinball machine, they can happen in like super quick succession because it's bouncing all over the place. So I don't know if it's exactly what I would have wanted if I was picking the sounds for this. And for the gameplay, I gave it a 3 out of 10. It does a pretty good job of emulating pinball. One thing I thought was really cool is they found a way to simulate the physics of it so that when the ball drops, it's actually, sort of rolling slowly down the screen as if it was an actual pinball. And it does bounce off of all the bumpers and the flippers and goes flying out a random direction from the spinner. So they did a lot of cool stuff that made it feel like you were playing pinball. But the main thing that held it back for me is that the impreciseness of the flippers and how like you couldn't exactly tell when you were supposed to be hitting the ball. And I was just mad because I kept missing it.
Yeah.
Basically just salty at the pinball machine.
Yeah.
But I do see how if you were playing this for a while, you'd probably figure out the timing and like when you're supposed to hit it, and you could probably get pretty good at it. And for the relevance, I gave it a 3 out of 10. It is the first pinball video game we played, so I think it's pretty important for that reason. But pinball video games aren't really a popular genre. We do still see some of them, like the 3D pinball and the Sonic pinball that I mentioned, but it's not something that's like huge and super popular now. But I did think it was a smart choice on Atari's part to throw Pong in instead of calling it like pinball something, to just have it pin Pong, because then at least it has the name recognition of Pong and Atari in that pinball form. But when I was doing just a little bit of outside research on this, it doesn't seem like a lot of people really cared about it too much or had a lot of extra info like recorded about it. So I don't think it ended up being super popular. And overall, I just gave it a 2.5 out of 10. It's a pretty fun game, but I think I could probably only do it for a couple plays and then I get pretty tired of it. Again, mainly because I'm salty about the flipper timing. But I think it is a cool idea, and it laid the groundwork for other pinball video games in the future. And even though it's a niche market, still, this is probably kind of what people started basing it off of and how it grew from there.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's like, it kind of shows that if the paddle, controls aren't good, the whole pinball game is just like out the window. That's the whole
Right.
point.
Yeah, and I feel like I can't say how people felt at the time, but I feel like coming from an era of just like all these mechanical pinball machines and then going to the first video game pinball, people must have been like, I'm hitting it when I'm supposed to hit it, but nothing's happening.
Right.
Because like you can physically see in a pinball machine, okay, I should hit it now, and it hits the ball. So yeah, it's a little weird, and just maybe if it was a bit more precise or what people would be used to for an actual pinball machine, it would change the experience a lot.
Yeah. Oh, pretty cool one. First of its kind. We can definitely say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely a interesting innovation and twist from Atari, like we were talking about. They always come up with something cool, even if it doesn't end up being super popular.
Yeah.
And so the next one that we're covering is just a honorable mention. This one's called Challenge, and it's by Micro Games, and it came out sometime in '74. And this is basically a Pong doubles clone, but it's by a company that we hadn't really heard anything from. And I think it's a new company at the time in '74. Did have a one-player version too, but other than that, there's not much info on this game.
So moving on from Challenge, we've got another honorable mention called One-on-One by PMC Electronics. And this one looked really cool, but there's only a flyer available. There's no pictures or videos, nothing. So basically, the game is a basketball game where you could hold the ball and then shoot it into a goal. And it used like blocky graphics to try to make out a basketball and a basketball court and some players, which, all that looked really interesting to me, but unfortunately all we have is a single flyer, so I don't even know if it was ever really produced. But
that does sound like it'd be pretty cool though.
Yeah, it looked, from the flyer, basically all I have is a single picture from the flyer, and it kind of looked like table tennis by the Odyssey, but when the ball came you could like hold it and then shoot it towards the basket, sort of like we mentioned hesitation a while back, where the ball like hesitated when it hit something. Like imagine that, but you're like the ball's like with you, and then you can fire it again towards a goal. So I think that's kind of how it played, but unfortunately, we don't have really any information on it.
Got it. And the next one that we have is one that I've been excited to talk about. It's called Touch Me by Atari. And that's pretty much the only reason I was excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that name. It makes me
because I'm a child and it cracks me up. Yeah. But this was basically just a Simon Says game involving 4 buttons and had some sound effects. Don't know too much more other than that, and I think that's basically all there was to it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it again actually because they made a handheld version in like '76 or something. So
Touch Me Too, Touch My Hand.
Yeah, touch me mobile.
Oh, that's the winner. I was trying to think of what the best title would be.
Yeah, so moving on from Touch Me, another weird one by Atari, by the way, but unique.
Yeah.
So this next one is one that I think I'll be talking about for a little while, which is Baseball by Ramtech. And the reason why I want to talk about this for a while is I think the game is like too good to be true. It's really good and really advanced to the point where I'm like, I don't think this was in 74. Like, there's just too many advances going on. But
right.
The vast majority of my sources online say it came out October of 1974. So I put it in there. Like, I thought maybe I'll just like hold it back a couple of months, but then it would be like just an arbitrary amount of months, you know?
Right.
So I kept going back and forth, but I believe this game probably came out in 75, even though most people say 74, just based upon the gameplay. So basically how the gameplay works is you're looking at a baseball field. There's probably, nine dudes on the baseball field? Which
sounds right to me.
Already, like, we've only had one game with human sprites, which has been basketball, right? And that one only had 4. And now we're up to like 9 to 10. And what's even crazier about it is they have some amount of animation going on. So when a person moves, like let's say he hits a single and goes from home plate to first base, there's like a pretty blocky run animation that goes on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like anything crazy, but there's probably 2 or 3 different frames, and you know, when you get them going back to back to back, it kind of looks like he's running or something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like animations for the pitcher throwing the ball, and like when the ball gets hit into the field, you know, multiple sprites are moving and animating at the same time. And so to me, that's like an immediate, this seems too good to be true. But apparently, a lot of people think it was released in 74. And the other thing that is interesting to me is, so the game's by Ramtech, and specifically the game is by Howell Ivey, who we've talked about because he made Clean Sweep.
Right.
Now, Clean Sweep came out just 5 months ago. So, again, I feel like there's a lot of innovation here and happening in a short amount of time. Not that that's unheard of, but it seems kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, and sprites at the time, I think, were possible because they were stored on read-only memory. And I don't know much about it more than that, but like, I feel like the limitations were probably a lot smaller in 74.
I mean, the only thing I will say is the first game with a microprocessor to come out, I think came out last episode or maybe the episode before that. And I know microprocessors really advanced the technology at the time, but just based upon the other games coming out, because we've got 2 other games later in this episode, which are both pretty innovative for their time, and I don't think either of them are anywhere close to the amount of power that this one would take. So that's why I think it probably came out later, but we'll talk about it today, and I'll rate it today, because it definitely deserves to be rated. You can play it on an emulator, which is pretty cool. And basically, you know, the game plays basically like a game of baseball. I think it's only 6 innings or something like that, but in the bottom of each corner, you have a ball and strike counter and an out counter, as well as the score for each player, which is to make it keep track of all those numbers. Again, I'm like, that seems pretty sketchy, but okay. The ball, after the pitcher threw it, it could be controlled in a very similar way to the English control of how that worked on the Odyssey. So you basically just had a lever and you could just make it go right or left, regardless of physics, you know, at the time.
Nice.
Yeah, but, you know, if it was in the middle of the plate or whatever, it knew that was a strike, and if it was out, it would count as a ball if you didn't swing. So again, pretty interesting. Basically, the batter was just a line that moved kind of like a paddle and pinball, Um, is that what they're called? Paddle, bumper, whatever.
I've been saying flipper and paddle
Flipper.
interchangeably. So
Flipper is a good word. I like the word flipper. So
there you go. Go flipper.
it's basically just a little flipper. There's no sprite on that part. It's just a flipper. But depending on like when the ball hit the flipper, it would go off in that direction, so that you could control what direction you hit the flipper or hit the ball. If you were the one batting, and you could kind of, if you wanted to go like hit it a little early or late, you could go towards the sides, and they'd seem to result in more like singles or doubles. Basically, if you hit the ball, it would tell you like immediately, like, oh, that was an out, that was a single. So there's not like physics going on in terms of the playing field. But if you hit it nice and it went like down the middle, it would be home run. So, and every time you hit the ball, the sprites on the bases would like move around to correspond to a single. You see like a little sprite come up from the bottom over to first base, and then the next guy hits a single and you see two sprites moving, like one to second, one to first. So it had all that. I mean, it was like the cornerstone of a baseball game that you would find today, I think.
Yeah.
It had everything that you could want, basically, other than the fielding sort of aspect of it. So, and obviously the pitching was like really simplified, but you could still make your own pitches. So it's a very unique game, very, very advanced for the time. I think even assuming it came out in 75, it would still be very advanced for its time. So, that's why I think it probably came out later, but it's just a really, really good game. Hal Ivey definitely knew what he was doing. I'll say that much.
Yeah. Do you know if it was fairly well received?
I'm not too sure how well it sold, but it spawned a lot of clones. So
yeah,
I would imagine it was pretty well received.
Because I think that would just be like I was going to say a home run. I guess that's
yeah.
But like it just seems like everything at the time that would be like super popular with people.
Yeah, we'll talk about a couple, just in a couple honorable mentions here. We've got some ports of it, but
right,
there's probably in total 5 or 6 different companies that made their own version of this game. So I'm going to say it was pretty popular, even though we know with Ramtech that they're kind of all over the place as a company.
Right.
Yeah, so getting into my ratings for gameplay, I give it a 4 out of 10. I think the gameplay is very solid, especially if you play this with another player, which it was 2-player, by the way. So one person was pitching, one's hitting, and it just has the core mechanics and the core amount of fun that comes with a baseball game that you would find today. So I thought, yeah, it's pretty good. I gave it 4 out of 10. I think it could definitely be improved, but, I think it's good. For graphics, I gave it a 3 out of 10. It does have animation, and it claims in multiple sources to be the first game with animation, which makes it even hard to put it in the timeline, because that could be like the second game with animation is probably not for like another year, so it could be anywhere,
Right.
But it probably was the first game with animation, so you definitely got to give it props to that, and the sprites look pretty good for what they were. I will say, there's nothing going on outside the game field, so there's no audience, there's nothing to make it interesting to look at that much, really, other than just the sprites moving around. But it still has very decent graphics, I think.
Yeah,
for the time. Especially for sounds like the only thing where they didn't do a good job. You basically have like a single sound that zaps at you if you get a strike, and a single sound if you get a hit, which is basically just the sound of like a pong ball hitting something. So,
right.
There was no cheers or anything there. No casting going on, which is always the best part of sports games, I think. So we'll take a listen to that right now. And then finally, for relevance, I gave it a 7 or 8 out of 10.
Ooh,
I know.
getting into a new rating system here.
I know. Well, the thing is, if it came out in 74, it's definitely an 8 out of 10, in my opinion. If it came out in 75, it's not so much, but a 7.
No, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I personally think it came out in 75 sometime early 75, but it seems pretty. I'm like against the historians on that one. I don't know what makes them believe it came out in 74, by the way. I tried to track it down, but it's just like, I don't know. I couldn't find any reason of why it would be, so that's another reason why I say this.
Hmm.
But yeah, overall, I gave it a 4 out of 10. It's a pretty solid game, you know? It's below average, for sure. If 5 is like an average type of game, and that's just because of how old it is and how, simple the graphics are, but the gameplay is there. If you were to play this game today, you would still find a fair amount of fun in it. So, it's an interesting one. Very different from anything else we've played, very advanced, but it could be that early, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody knows for sure.
I say this almost every episode, but we had the technology in 74. What were people doing? Just not taking any notes? Or
Yeah.
literally a game released and people bought it and we're all like, I don't know when it happened.
Yeah, I know.
It's kind of insane.
There are flyers, but the thing about flyers is they don't have dates on them, which is crazy.
Right.
So
yeah.
I can't look there. The only thing I could do is like look at, what the flyer said and, match the game experience I had playing the game. So I imagine I played the correct game. So
right.
Other than that, though, I don't really have anything else I can do.
Yeah. Just kind of limited resources out there.
Yeah. So if you guys out there know when this game was released, please let us know. It seems like most people agree it's in October of 74, but I think based upon these other games that have come out, and we've played every single one of them, we should mention I've played like all of them, so I feel like I have a pretty good idea of where the technology is at, and this just seems a little bit too far ahead of the time, so that's why I say that. We will talk about baseball in the future because, like I said, there's a bunch of sequels and stuff that come out, so we'll touch on it again in the future episodes, but for the first one, we'll put here because that's where most historians agree it is, and go from there. So, Baseball by Ramtech, an innovator. Whenever it was released, it's still innovated for the time. So,
yeah, sounds like an incredible one, and we'll just solidly say, okay, it was 74. We have our hesitations, but let's move on.
Exactly. We'll put some cautionary bolding around it on the website.
Yeah. And so the next one that we have then is an honorable mention, and this is Zap by Allied Leisure, which came out in October of 74. And this one is a ping pong game that allowed the players to move their paddles horizontally and vertically. But other than that, we don't really have any info on what else the game was about. And after that, we have a bunch of ports of Baseball by Ramtech. We have a Ballpark by Midway, Batter Up by Volley, Deluxe Baseball by Seaberg, and these were all in November or December of 74. And next we get to one that I'm super excited to talk about, and this is Tank by Key Games, which, again, a reminder, is basically Atari. And this came out in November of 74, and it was created by Steve Bristow and Lyle Raines at Key Games. And one of the things that makes this one so exciting is that it was apparently the only Key Games game that was an original and not an Atari clone. So Atari hadn't created anything Tank before. It was just something that I think Steve Bristow came up with, and then Lyle Raines helped implement. And when it came out, it was really commercially successful and sold, I think, 10,000 copies reportedly in the first year, I think.
Holy crap.
Yeah, which seems like a lot. And right after this, Key Games merged with Atari, and apparently Atari wasn't doing well at the time, despite some of the games that we were saying they had that were fairly popular. And the sales from Tank actually helped keep the newly merged Atari in business.
Yeah, I think the Grand Track 10 kind of devastated them. I don't know if you remember, but they kind of sold that at a loss for a while.
Oh,
I
right,
think it
right.
was like
Because
a
of
pretty
how,
big loss, and that game sold fairly well, so they like lost a lot of money. So
right. I guess how much the cabinet cost to make, or was it just
yeah, I think it had something to do with the hardware side of it.
right?
Was just more expensive to make than what they sold it for. So good job on them. But yeah, Tank really helped them out.
Yeah. So maybe some bad business technique on selling Grand Track, but they did well on having this weird other company that made the same games they made and then came up with an original game and merged with them.
Yeah.
So and it also has another example of how popular Tank was. It had 4 sequels made in the years to come, and also the original was later put into a cocktail cabinet version, one of the cocktail table ones that we had been talking about. And it's also notable because it's one of the early games to use read-only memory to store the sprites that the represented the tanks in the game. And for the cabinet itself, it was 2 joysticks, so it's kind of the typical tank controls where you have to rotate and then move forward with 2 separate things. And on top of one of the joysticks, it had a fire button. So for the gameplay, it's pretty much what you might expect. You're 2 different tanks. One is white and the other one's black. And there's a maze, or not a super complex maze, but more just kind of barriers and walls all over the screen that block your path, and it can block the tank shells. And you have to go through, shoot the other player, and whoever gets the most points by the end of the timer wins. And they also added in something cool where there's a bunch of X's in the middle of the map that represent mines. And if you run over them, you blow up, and the other player gains a point. One thing that I thought was interesting, and I guess it's kind of makes sense for the time and a lot of the other games that were coming out, but there isn't any respawn or like teleport on death. So if you get shot, you're still like in exactly the same location, and you can just keep getting shot over and over and over again.
Oh, good.
The one video I was watching, because this is one that unfortunately we couldn't get an emulator for and play. I was watching the 2 guys play on the original cabinet, and for like 5 points each, they were just stuck with like their cannons down each other's throats, just shooting over and over again. So that seems a little bit weird to me, but again, I think it makes sense for games of the time. And that was pretty much it. It's a pretty simple game, but it just did a lot of things right that I think made it super popular. So for my ratings, for the graphics, I gave it a 3 out of 10. It's pretty simple graphically, but the tank sprites, like you look at it and you definitely think, okay, that's a tank. And I think they do a good job of representing that, and you can get a good feel for it. And also the way that they displayed the graphics with the black tank and the white tank, and kind of the whole background was sort of a lighter black or gray. You could really tell what was going on and like who was what character and where you were on the screen, which is a nice bonus when some games at the time you can't really differentiate what's happening.
Yeah.
And also, there was a pretty impressive effect when the tank shell explodes and hits another player. There's kind of a quick flash and then a bunch of particles, or dots, so that it looks like dust right next to where you hit the player. And going back to something I bring up in a lot of these early games, I like that the scores are on the top of the screen and clearly able to see them, and also they're in black and white text, so you don't have to remember, okay, I'm left side of the screen, he's right side of the screen. You can actually just look at the colors and see how many points that you have. And this is a bit of a sidetrack after my graphics rating, but one thing I noticed in this, and I'm sure we've seen it in some games before, but when the tank gets hit, it does something that I feel like is ubiquitous in a lot of 2D games now and over this whole history, where your sprite basically flashes to indicate that you're invincible for a brief period of time, and also that you just got hit.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about it, but because it's just like in every 2D game, I feel like you see that, and even in some 3D games. So I didn't even think about it as a feature, but I'm like, oh wow, that's a interesting aspect that I don't know if we've really seen before.
Yeah. I know like Grand Track 10, if you like go off the edge or whatever, your car would like spin a little bit and you get some of those invulnerability frames. But
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if we've ever seen a game that flash like this one does. And that flashing is like very common in a lot of games to come.
Yeah, and I've been watching a lot of Mario Maker, and it made me think of, whenever you're got the mushroom and then you get hit as Mario and you're blinking, so you can basically run on spikes or do whatever else to.
Yeah,
It's
you
funny how
just go
people work
for
that
it.
into their courses. Yeah. Yeah, and breaking down how that actually works, it looks like the sprite of the tank is probably actually a solid square, just with different parts being different colors. And so the tank part of the sprite would turn the background color or turn off, and then the outline of the square would blink white. So it
Oh,
was neat
cool.
to kind of show the flashing because it was basically like outline tank, repeating really fast, so it looked like it was flashing.
Hmm.
And so back to the ratings for sound, I gave it a 4 out of 10. It wasn't anything like incredibly innovative or fancy, but I feel like it just did a really good job of all the sounds that you need and would expect from a tank game. Like when both players were just sitting still, there was actually like an engine idling sound that played.
Nice.
And as you kind of sped up, there was like kind of revving and similar to the Grand Track sounds, although I think they did actually do something a little bit different, but like revving engine sounds as you built up speed. And I think they had the two different sounds for the players be different pitches too, so you could kind of hear them overlapping each other if one player was idling and the other player was moving, or even if both players were moving.
Nice. Why don't we take a listen to that?
Yeah. And also just the firing and hit sounds, they were a little bit quieter and pretty simple, but just satisfying and kind of exactly what you need. It's not like all these Pong bleep bloops happening when your tank is shooting another tank, which I thought was nice. And for gameplay, I gave it a 4 out of 10. Simple gameplay, but I think just the addition of small things like the maze and the mines give it just enough like extra stuff or random kind of elements to keep it interesting. And I think the fact that it's a competitive, like a player versus player game helps it out a lot too, because the technology at the time probably wouldn't have been very good for a single player version of it. I don't even think they could have had AI really on that. But something about just shooting your friends with big guns is always fun in games. And I think they hit on that with the tank game. And I think one thing that might detract from it is the tank controls, where you have the two different joysticks, would probably take a little bit to get used to. But I don't think it's so bad that it wouldn't be fun to play. I think you'd get used to it pretty quick and still have a good time with it.
I will say, like, the controls I make, to me, the controls make it feel like you're actually in a tank and not in like a race car that shoots guns, you know?
Right, it shoots guns. Well,
Yeah, it shoots guns, and those guns shoot other guns that shoot
right.
bullets.
There's actually a that's in Gungeon, which cracks me up. It's a gun called Bullet that shoots guns that shoot bullets.
Nice.
But had to call you out. Sorry.
It's okay.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of the fact that it is a little bit clunky or it's different than just driving a race car with a joystick makes it feel like, oh yeah, I'm in like a big heavy tank kind of because it like moves a little bit slower and you have to take your time with it.
Yeah, and the other
Yes,
thing,
that's a good point.
the other thing I liked about it was the barriers that you mentioned. They kind of, they remind me a lot of tank games today, where you might hide behind a house or something and try to get that long shot off on somebody.
Right. Yeah, it gives you time to line it up and you can kind of peek out and then duck back in.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
gameplay wise, it really reminded me a lot of today's type of tank games, which are, even though I don't play any tank games, apparently like a lot of people do. So
Yeah, like what's the huge free to play one? World of Tanks or
yeah, World of Tanks, I think, and I think
Yeah.
it's pretty well played. So
Yeah. So I mean there's definitely still a market for it. It makes me think of the We Play tank game, which was just like an incredible Wii tank game, and it's very similar where you're top down looking at two tanks and you can shoot your shells and peek out behind corners and stuff like that.
Hmm.
That was something I played a lot growing up, so definitely very reminiscent of that for me. And then so for the relevance, I gave it a 7 out of 10. I think it gets a really high relevance because it was such a commercial success and it had a bunch of sequels after that. And also Atari is such a huge name and it's one of the things that helped keep Atari in business. So I think that definitely, just that part of it, gives it a lot of relevance. And also, it's the first original and maybe, I think, last original game by Key Games, because after that they merged with Atari. So they're one and only, as far as I know, original title that wasn't a clone.
Yeah, and we should mention that Tank was so successful that the relationship between Key Games and Atari was basically discovered. But because it was so successful, the publishers at the time, or I guess the publishers or the people who made the cabinets, they still wanted to sell Tank because they're like, these are flying off like hotcakes. You know, we don't mind that you basically lied to us for the past like 3 years and are the same company. We'll just keep selling Tank.
Right, and they lifted some of the licensing restrictions that Atari and Key Games had tried to get around by making them two separate companies to sell more copies, because they're like, well, it's making us so much money, I guess we'll let you guys get away with it.
Yeah, and I feel like because of that, that's one of the reasons why they merged, because there wasn't any reason to have two separate companies at that point, really.
Right, yeah, because it was such a success.
Yeah, even though by that time, each company had a following, so I think there were games that were, quote unquote, like made by Key Games even after the merge, just because it was a different brand. Yeah, and that brand still had power too, so I believe there is still other Key Games, although, you know, it's even more like, you know, the same company going forward. So
right, exactly. So maybe not the last quote unquote original game by Key Games, but definitely the first one that they had made.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see them more, because they definitely knocked it out of the park with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's reflected in my rating. I gave it a 4 out of 10, which is definitely high for some of the stuff that we've been going over recently.
Oh yeah.
I think it's a simple and fun tank game, and then just all the nice graphical effects with the sprites and the flashing, and then the sounds that work really well with the game, just kind of bring the whole thing together to make it a really good game, even though it is fairly simple. And I think it's definitely the kind of game that, like, if I saw it at a cabinet today and was there with my friends, I'd still want to play that today.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with like a multiplayer deathmatch tank game, you know?
Exactly. It always gets people hyped up, and especially if it even plays like fairly well, you're going to have a good time doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all I have for Tank. Overall, it's a great game, and had a fun time learning more about it.
Yeah, so moving on from Tank, we've got Quack by Atari, which is, I guess, the sound a duck makes when you shoot it, because it's a duck shooting game. This is interesting. By the way, this is the fourth game from Atari in this episode. I feel like they really saved up for the holiday releases here.
Yeah,
we're now in like late 74 sort of time period. But basically this is a light gun game where you shoot ducks, and there's overlays on the screen that kind of make it look like reeds and clouds and stuff. And then the actual screen, the only thing that's on it is sort of it's a duck, but it's one of those ducks where it's basically just two lines, you know, that look like a V or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting about it is it had more or less animation where the duck would go around and move and land on stuff, you know, quote unquote land on stuff. So the animation seemed very advanced. I will say, you know, there's no emulation for it. There's some flyers. There's like one or two videos that aren't good quality. So I'm not totally sure if it's a video game or if there's some electric mechanical components to it. But the fact that it used overlays kind of obscured the screen a little bit. So it wasn't the easiest one to review. So that's why we just have it as an honorable mention. And, you know, just another caveat, it could be electrical, mechanical, but I think it's probably a video game on this one. And, you know, having the duck be animated was pretty cool.
Yeah, especially if it really is a video game, because that's a pretty big step.
Yeah, I mean, it makes more sense to me that this would be the first game with animated graphics, because it's just a single duck moving around, as opposed to like 10 baseball players.
Right, yeah.
But I don't know. So that moves me on to our next game, which is Speed Race by Taito.
There we go.
Yeah. Practiced that all week. This came out in November of 74 and was the next game that I went in depth on. This game is the first game with scrolling graphics, and holy crap, does it feel good. I feel like this is such an important innovation and one that, would only happen in a racing game, really. But basically, the gameplay is you're looking overhead at your race car, and there's like a single line road that goes north to south that you're on. And as you speed up with the accelerator, other race cars that are ahead of you kind of slow down and fall down, so it looks like you're passing them, What was awesome about it was because of the scrolling graphics, depending on how fast you went, the speed of those other cars would change in how they fall.
Oh, cool.
And that made it feel like you were really racing and dodging in between these cars and speeding up and slowing down. And, cars would come up like in from the top and disappear from the bottom, never to be seen again. So the scrolling aspect of it really made you feel like you were going fast, which is really cool. Because, especially if you spun out or something and you lost all your speed, you would see those other cars come up from the bottom really fast, as if they were right behind you. So, and then you would slowly speed up and they would fall back down. How the gameplay worked is the actual track that you were on that was basically straight, the edges of it would slowly get wider and narrower. So sometimes you'd have a little bit more room to go in between the cars. And sometimes it was a very narrow track and you had to split the hairs. So the game was definitely kind of difficult, and you didn't have a lot of reaction time if you were going really fast to dodge the cars, because you would just be passing them really fastly. So it's a hard game for sure, and the further you got, the more cars would come down at you. And that's how they got you. When 2 or 3 cars would come down at a time, I'd be like, okay, that's basically it. Even though I wasn't able to play this game in an emulator, but there's quite a few videos on this game, quite a few arcade machines that still exist today. So it was a good one to review. I still felt pretty confident in reviewing it. So let me go through my scores. That's basically all the gameplay, by the way. There's a timer, which is how long you've got, and you basically are just trying to go as far as you can and get the high score, and that's it. So There's no 2-player component. There's no real AI, unless you count how it spawns in the cars as the AI. So that's basically most of the game. But what was really core to it was this is a racing game and I feel like I'm going fast, which unlike Grand Track 10, which on that one, it felt more like you were driving an RC car, like a toy car across the floor.
Right, because you can see the whole track the whole time, right?
Right, exactly. Whereas this one, it's kind of being generated as you're going. So,
right,
that was cool. It made me feel like I was playing like an old NES, racing game, like
Pole Position's the one.
Pole
I always
Position,
think
yes,
of.
exactly. Yeah. That it kind of had that feel to it. Although the camera's different on that one, but yeah,
right. That's sort of a chase cam or whatever behind the car.
Right. So it was basically felt very similar otherwise. So yeah.
Wow.
And this one I'm like 99% positive it came out this time. So that's good. So yeah, it came out November of 74 by Taito. It was developed by Tomohiro Nishikudo, which I'm hopefully saying that right. He goes on to make Space Invaders. So he's definitely someone to keep an eye out for. And actually read that as he was looking back on his life or whatever, this Speed Race was actually his favorite game that he ever made. So,
oh, cool.
Definitely a cool one. I should say there's also at times slicks on the tracks, which act very similarly. If you try to turn when you're in a slick, you'll just like rush towards the edge. They would spawn, I think, every 1,000 points or something. And yeah, it had a steering wheel for a peripheral. It had pedals. It had a gear shift. So, and you were still standing up playing this like the Grand Jack 10 one, which is interesting. So yeah, I gave gameplay a 2.5 out of 10. I think it's pretty good, but it's missing a lot of the things that would keep me really interested in it. For one thing, you can't really see ahead of you that much. So the time you have to dodge things is pretty short, and it kind of feels a little cheap that way. So, and they keep coming at you infinitely. So that's kind of like you'll never really win.
Right. You pass 16 cars and you're like, I didn't pass them all yet.
Yeah, exactly. So, I feel like there's some gameplay elements missing to make it a truly enjoyable racing game, but it's got some of them. Graphics, I only gave a 2 out of 10. Now, even though the scrolling graphics, there's a lot missing here compared to today's standards. Like, there's no background, it's just black. All the cars that you're passing are the same model. So, there's really no variation in the graphics other than they're scrolling and they're coming at you in a way that feels very natural. So, I gave it some credit, but I didn't want to go too high because obviously there's going to be a lot of innovations later. For sound, I gave it a 2 out of 10. It's another kind of race car game, so you've got more race car sounds. We'll play a clip of that right now. And finally, for relevance, this is where I gave it its props. I gave it an 8 out of 10 because the scrolling graphics, I mean, you basically need that in order to play any 3D game, I would think. And even any 2D game that has more than that, you can like scroll the screen. You need scrolling graphics. So,
right.
That's like every game. So, yeah, this is a pretty important game in the history of video games. I wanted to reflect that. And overall, I gave it a 3.5 out of 10. It's not quite as advanced as baseball and as enjoyable as baseball, but it's a really great early racing game that makes you feel like you're driving fast. So, yeah, it's a good one. I'm really glad we got the chance to play it.
Yeah, it sounds like it covers at least a decent bit of what's important in making a racing game fun.
Right. Yeah. Like Grand Track 10 had the racing car, it had the peripherals and all that stuff, but this game had all that and it made you feel like you were going fast, which to me is one of the biggest reasons why I would play a racing game. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And the scrolling graphics, every racing game we're going to see after here basically is probably going to use that. So very important step, even though, the game itself is pretty rudimentary. So I said that kind of weird, but whatever. So yeah, Speed Race. Moving on from that, the next game is another honorable mention. This game is called TV Pinball by Exidy, which if you remember, we talked about a little bit. They split off from Ramtech and started doing their own thing. I think this is their first game that they made by themselves, which came out in November of 74. And this is a classic breaking game, similar to kind of Clean Sweep, but it had even more of a breakout type feel where you're actually hitting bricks or, squares in this case. But it seemed to be started to develop at Ramtech, but after the split, Exidy somehow got the personnel or the idea and it was their game. So it would end up being made quite a lot. So why don't you talk about that, Wes?
Yeah. So the next one that we had is a licensed version of TV Pinball, and that's TV Pin Game by Chicago Coin, released in 74. And definitely that with arcade games too, we're going to be seeing a lot of brick breaking games. Yeah.
I should say, by the way, I think Chicago Coin has only copied other people's stuff. We've seen that pretty often, but yeah.
And they're still around, so as of 74.
Yeah,
I don't know their history yet, but
but yeah, I really wanted to play this one because I thought this was very similar to Clean Sweep, which you really enjoyed, but even sort of a next level of it. But unfortunately, there was no emulation for TV Pinball or TV Pin Game or any of the other clones, which kind of bummed me out. So
yeah,
I really want to play it, but unfortunately, all we had were flyers. Again, there were not even any YouTube videos, so kind of unfortunate. So hopefully we'll play something else by Exidy here coming up. That'll be pretty fun. So yeah, and that'll do it for the day. Wes, we've covered some pretty amazing games in this episode.
Yeah, we went through a lot of stuff. I mean, we started off with people who made Space Sim covering the next game that they made. Then we have Ping Pong, which I got to play. Our first digital video game version of pinball. A couple other honorable mentions: Touch Me, of course.
Oh yeah.
Baseball by Ramtech, which is incredibly advanced for 74, and that's where we're going to stick with that. And then a bunch of clones from or ports of Baseball by Ramtech. The Amazing Tank by Key Games, which super fun. I could still sit down and play it today, and I think that we'd have still have a good time with it. Quack, some light gun, some other contested whether who had the first animation in a game, and Speed Race by Taito, which you just talked about, which makes you feel like you're going fast, which is what's important in a racing game.
Oh yeah, and I think this episode really shows you that even in 74, the holidays, in the November sort of time period, great games are going to come out. So
yeah, that's when to sell your games, and that's when parents are going to be buying. Well, in this, I guess holidays, buying arcade machines for people to play during the holidays. But
yeah, I guess like updating your arcade store, for the holidays. So yeah, all these games we didn't play any computer games this time.
It's crazy.
Yeah, we'll fix that next episode. Don't worry. All right, so with that, we'll close it out. Please visit our website.
Tweet us on Twitter if you have anything you want to say or anything you want us to talk about, and send us an email if you have any questions or you just want to reach out to us.
Yep, and we only have one more episode of 1974. We're going to be talking about video game consoles that come out in 1974. So stick around. That'll be coming up here shortly, and have a great day.
We'll see you guys next time.